Mix It with Mike plugin of the week comes from Eventide. It's the SplitEQ. The SplitEQ is an EQ that splits the transient signal from the tonal signal, meaning that it allows you to apply a different EQ, if you choose, to the transient element at any given frequency area versus the tonal, which is the sustain area. And this opens up a whole new world of possibility in terms of doing corrections, fixing things. The more I begin to really dig into this, I find that it may be one of the most valuable tools that I've seen in a very long time for correcting problems and struggles that I've almost always had with EQ, where you always feel a little bit like you got 50% there to what you really wanted to get to. And I'm really talking about things where you have problem tracks that have, an exaggerated tone on a snare drum, a woofy, acoustic guitar, a vocal that's overly sibilant, or bright and harsh. And whenever you try to do something to help bring it out, it makes it muddy or it makes it hard or brittle sounding. And so by being able to separate the transient signal from the tonal signal, right, which is the sustain after it or around it, you can then dig into certain aspects of the sound a little bit more meticulously and accurately, or surgically, perhaps is the best word. So let's go over it real quick. We got the toolbar section at the top, pretty straightforward, A, B, presets, all of that stuff, undo, redo. A little bit of an information section here, just some things if you want to show the tooltips, get to the user guide, etc. And then this is the zoom for the dB here, right? So the scale that you're working with here. So I'm going to leave this at plus minus 12. Down at the bottom, we have the EQ toolbar down here at the bottom. It shows two modes. It shows EQ or pan. So you can take individual bands and the frequencies that you boost or attenuate and pan those frequencies or move them around in a couple different modes, and you can also EQ them. So what it gives you is a boost. You could just drag it on the screen like you normally would. You can select different types of filters, and then once you have it here, you can separate out the tonal, which is the blue, versus the transient, which is green. So it gives you separate EQ adjustments for either one. Now, those are the elements that are separated. You can actually also separate things like the Q or the bandwidth. Now, you cannot separate the frequency, and I'll go through some of the differences here, but if I hold the Shift key here, I can go ahead and adjust the Q and make it different on the sustain side than from the transient side. So I could do things like really focus in on the transient on a kick drum that's woofy, kind of back off a little bit of the sustain or the tone of it, but really focus in and detail out on the transient side of it, the real, hit of the drum, and then strike a balance between the two. That would be one classic example or way of using this. So I then have the separate controls here, which I can adjust together, right? Or I can adjust independently of each other, or I could do it here with a series of shortcuts. If I want to hear what I'm doing, if you're on a Mac and you hold the Option Command key or Alt Control key on the Windows, that will allow you, you'll see the little speaker icon appears, or the headphone icon, that would allow me to listen to this so I could really focus in on this particular element. Now, of the different filter types for each band, you got low shelf peak, notch filter. When you use a notch filter, you can actually decide which one you want to use. So you could apply the notch just to the transient, or you could apply it just to the tonal signal, or you can apply it to both, right? So you could get the both of them in there, and they can have different cues as well. This is just a leftover from what I had. So that's one thing. Otherwise, if you have just, say, for example, a peak band, and you wanted to just boost one but not the other, you would just zero this one out, right? So you would just Option click there or Alt click, and that would make the tonal gain nothing. So you would only be boosting just on the transient signal. When you have something like a high pass, low pass filter, here, when you have a filter, the EQs can be independent. So again, you can have the transient signal have a lower frequency than the resonance signal, or vice versa, right? So that, again, gives you some measure of extra control. So that's the only filter type that will allow you to have different frequencies. Bands 1 through 6 will all be tied together. So that's the basics of it. Now, when you work with sounds, and I'm going to get into this, you can take any of the bands that you work with here and you can pan them in one of two modes. You could work in a left-right pan or in a mid-side pan, so you can change the width of the tone or mono up if you want to the transient to make it tighter, so you can play around with that. Or you could just move those types of things around, and I'll show you some examples where that can actually be quite cool. So within the frequencies, you should try to pan them left, right. That only works on stereo tracks, or the panning also only works if you take a mono to stereo. So you could take the EQ and assign it as a mono input but stereo output, and then it would allow you to do some panning within different frequencies. This can be really cool for moving things around in, say, like overheads, where you can focus in a little bit more on a hi-hat frequency and shift it more into a specific localized area wherever you want it to be, move it to the center, move it over to the side, etc. So there's lots of tools or ways that you can use it that way. All right, so we have all of that. The two modes are here. Now, what we'll get into as well is when you select a sound, there's a whole bunch of presets here. I wouldn't even call them presets. There are algorithms that you would load up. So if you're working on a bass, you would load up a bass preset, and then what it would do, it's not going to change anything on the display, but it will change the way that it analyzes the difference between the transient signal and the tonal signal. And in this section right here, you can make adjustments to that. So there's a transient separation control. This will tighten up the transient so you get a shorter, more focused transient. If you bring this number downward, it will give you a wider transient, so it'll give you more control. That's often beneficial if you really want to hear the effect. The decay is the way that it moves from how the transient fades out, basically. And it's setting up the crossover, the way that it crosses over to the tonal signal. So what ends up happening in dividing it into these two components is that you can create two different EQs for the attack signal, a different EQ for the tonal signal, and then the way that they sort of cross over to each other is controlled here by the decay, and then also the smooth control. So if you set the smooth control to 0, I think more or less it would be as if they were the same, right? Settings applying both, so it crossfades the effect almost out. And then if you go up to 50 there, then it makes it super sharp. Unless I got that backwards, which is very possible. No, 0 is very fast and discrete, and 50 is crossfading it. Reduces the difference. So I had it the opposite. Good thing I checked there. All right, so we have that. The master section here. Now, there's also a thing here which allows you to solo up the transient or solo up the tonal signal so you can tune this in. You could also do it up here in the master section, so you can solo up the tonal or the transient signal. And this can actually be really cool as well. Even if you're just looking for a trigger signal, you could take this sound, using it as a trigger signal, focus in on just the transient, and you get those really sharp triggers without all the sustain there. You also have separate level controls for the sustain versus the transient energy. So you can actually take, for example, a snare drum that has a lot of bleed and kind of back off, make the snare drum tighter, almost like a gate, like it's gated, but just backing off a little bit of the sustain energy around it. So there's a lot of potential for things like that as well as an adjustment. Again, you could solo up the other one from here, so all of that works. And then you have separate level controls for each, which is just what I was doing there. Separate pan controls for the transient and tonal side on a global level versus the independent level. There's an EQ scale, so if you make adjustments here, you can lessen them. You can't make them greater. I wish you could do that, but you can't do that. You could bypass the global settings, bypass the EQ settings independently. Right, so there's some bypass options, and then you have the metering options here with a series of different settings here. If you wanted to freeze the EQ graph, etc., what do you show post EQ or pre EQ, etc., etc., all of those sorts of things. So those two go through here, but just starting with that basic principle, let's just start with a couple of basic sounds here. Like one example that I have here is just a snare drum that has like a wicked resonant tone on it. So if we just start... And you could see it right in there. So if I were to filter this in, and I'm just going to zoom in on this. And if I can solo it up here, right, so I can hear it. Right, so I could find that. So now what I would want to do here, the blue is the tonal one, so I could grab this and pull it down. So now what would normally happen if I were to just do the EQ, I'm just going to double click on this here, and so it'll move the other one here. This is what it would sound like if I just had EQ'd it out. Right, so you hear how you lose all that frequency content. But if I take this and I can move the transient energy, I can preserve some, if not all of it. Right, so I can actually pull this out. I could even notch it out and just notch it out on the tonal side, but leave some of the acoustic energy in there on the transient side to just kind of control it. And then I can also do some things here, like let me just take so I got a shelf here. Right, now if I wanted to take some of the tonal energy out here, I could tighten up the snare drum, which kind of takes away a little bit of the bleed. Right, so now I'm doing this and I'm skipping one important step, so I'm still getting used to this here, but normally what I would do is I would set this to snare. I could lock that in, so it would now use an algorithm for that. And if I wanted to really focus this in, I could solo up the transient and see if I could tune it in. Or I could solo up the RMS. So it is picking up the hi-hat energy as part of the transient. But, and so I can tune out a little bit. I could tighten it up if I wanted to. All right, so now let me take that out. Right, and you can see how at least I can get it to some kind of a workable place. And if I really wanted to focus in on the body, I could find a different note in here, on, without, dragging this on too far. But being able to take the tonal end out and really just kind of focus in a little bit more on the body just from the train, just to get the snap. Right, so I just can get a little bit more body out of it just in a short-term way without getting all of the extra tone out of it, right? So that's example one. Another example here would be a bass. Here, let me move forward here a little bit up to this. So I got some things here where I can dig in. Right, so I got this clicking sound here, which can be anything from, like the pick noise. It can be the strings slapping on the fretboard, etc., a whole variety of other things. And so here, similar type of thing. I don't want to lose the air of the bass, but I do want to shape a little bit of the transient energy. So what I do is I can select a bass. Here, if I want, I can go ahead and focus in on... Right, so I want to find that area where, the noise is. And then once I've got that kind of out, then I can go ahead and, I don't know, let's just try doing a shelf here. All right, so now that obviously is going to bring up a lot of stuff. Maybe I don't need to do it that far, but let me take the tonal energy, leave that in, and then bring the transient energy down. So I can lessen that, but also by leaving the ambient energy or tonal energy in there, I can do so without losing the presence. Because if I just filter this out, and I could do that in a more notch-like way, but I think if you get the basic concept there, you could see how that would be another helpful way of drawing some positive results out of something without having to re-record or using a declick kind of thing, which can often, can create artifacts. Another example here is an acoustic guitar. So what I did with this is a mono acoustic guitar track, but I put in a plugin that makes it mono to stereo. So it divides it out to stereo. So now I have a pan mode here. So let's just say that I have the acoustic. Let's listen to the acoustic. All right, so the first thing I can do here is I'll just bring up a little bit of this just to kind of get rid of some of the rumble. All right, so maybe I want to go in here and I want to take I want to eliminate some of the resonance of the body and the low end. All right, so what I can do here is I can take the tonal side of it, back it off a bit, and then work within here. Again, still learning. Let me put this on the guitar. All right. I'm going to leave a little bit more in here. All right, and then can take away some of the the tonal resonance there, or the thump of it, and draw it out a little bit more that way. And a similar thing, I could actually just maybe either get so I don't get as much of the pick noise. Let me try taking away some. Just that extra detail, or that extra refined control is really cool. So now if I take this, like right now I'm in pan mode right here. I could also do some things here. So let's just take band 2 here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift the transient and the tonal energy a little bit to the left. And then I'm going to take the band 6 here and take the higher frequency energy, shift it a little bit to the right. Now you can take a sound and kind of open it up a bit, a little, get it to kind of spread out a little bit, where it feels a little bit more ambient, like it's a little bit more going on in front of you. So you can see that there's a lot of ways that you can really dig into this and work with this. Another one is with vocals, and one of the things that you can find in a vocal, and I already have something sort of in here, but I'll kind of rework it from a default and see if we can do it. And is that sometimes you have a vocal that has an exaggerated sibilance problem or a harshness problem, or is muddy, and you're trying to get the focus out of it without losing the body. Again, same kind of idea. If you look what I did here, I took the transient energy and I shifted up a bump in there in the low end, right? So this is just above, I don't know, like 150 or so in the bottom end of this particular vocal, just to get a little bit more oomph out of there. I did remember to put the vocal thing in there. I can also lock it in so I can't change it accidentally. But then I rolled off more of the low tonal energy. So what's happening, so this is just on the filter is actually what it is. So I can roll that off so I can get rid of the resonant boominess that might be something that's inherently built into the room that recorded, especially when you record into these small vocal booths and things like that. You often get these low mid resonances that occur. And this way you can sort of tame down those resonances without actually losing a bit of the thump. And an important thing is getting the separation control right. This is where you can really fine-tune things and get them right. And then here, to tame harshness, I can lift out the tonal energy for more air without getting the sharpness of the attack of the vocal. All right, so this may sound horrible. Let's give it a go here, though.
Way I've reckoned.
Let me go back.
Clutch onto this sinking ship, delude me into a state of bliss, offer me some peace and kind, rectify my inconsolable mind. Clutch onto this sinking ship, delude me into a state of bliss, offer me some peace and kind, rectify my inconsolable mind.
Right, so you could see here, I can shift this back in. I can resonate that back up, kind of.
Clutch onto this sinking ship.
Right, so that's what it would be like there. I could pull it back.
Clutch onto this sinking ship, delude me into a state of bliss.
Now, if you over-resonate this, you can also bring out, or you could do the opposite here to sort of notch out or pull out plosives and things like that as well. by digging into them and pulling it out from the transient side while leaving the low frequency resonant energy, or it may end up working the other way around, whichever way works, right?
Clutch onto this sinking ship, delude me into a state of bliss, offer me some peace in kind, rectify my inconsolable mind.
And then the decision on this end may be something completely different, where if I wanted to bring in more articulation and detail.
Clutch onto this sinking ship, delude me into a state of bliss, offer me some peace in kind, rectify my inconsolable mind.
And it may be some balance of the two where you want more articulation and some ambient air energy. This works amazingly well just for like the ambient air kind of thing, because you take away the transient kind of component of it, so it creates a bit more of an evenness around the boost, and which is just kind of an interesting, very different way of working with it. This thing is just a problem-solving machine, in literally installing it this morning and just kind of playing around with and thinking about a bunch of the different mixes. I just started pulling in. It's like, oh yeah, I remember that snare I was working. Let me just drag that in. I remember that bass that had all the clicks where I might, use a declicker to get rid of it. Now it seems to me that with this, I can sort of grasp or start to dig into some of these problems more effectively. And even just the normal equalization, just having this balance between how much I EQ the transient energy, that detail articulation versus the airy kind of, background energy or the sustained energy that goes around the different frequency zones, it offers like a whole other layer of sophistication to all of the EQ work that you would be doing, where it's not just this sort of one size fits all kind of thing. And just within a day, I've just very quickly been able to kind of figure out some things. So I found it to be very intuitive in terms of digging into it. Yeah, it kicks ass. It sounds great. And this is a super cool, valuable tool, and it's going to be a regular one in my toolbox for sure, for exactly just some of the things that I highlighted, even though I just sort of roughed them into place. You could hear the flexibility and things and control that you don't have with the normal EQ. So great stuff. Eventide kicked ass on this one. Got to give them an A+. So there you have it. Plugin of the week from Eventide. It's the SplitEQ.